I want to deal with tonight is the dialectic. Because we started talking last week about Rav Shimon Shkop brings in the idea Chayecha Kodem. So he started off with this idea that Kodesh Baruch Hu is totally selfless, totally gives. So you would think, and he says that's the union of Kedusha, and like he's Kodesh, you're supposed to be Kodesh, but the fact is he develops this whole idea that therefore there's a value in giving to others, and the idea of being like God in the sense of being selfless. He says, but obviously there's a limit because we can't be totally selfless. Okay. The point is, then he starts talking about the fact is that first of all he says he places within us this aspect that we have to take care of ourselves as an aspect of self-love that is immediate, that is inherent to us. Okay? And the fact is, he develops this idea of he comes to the idea right, that your life has to go first. So the point is that allows us this idea of introducing the dialectic. So I just want to talk a little bit about the dialectic within Torah, because I think it's a very powerful concept. When you hear the word dialectic in the general world, what is usually thought of is a philosopher by the name of Hegel. Okay, his first name. He lived in the early 1800s. And Hegel had this whole theory based upon thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So what comes is there's a thesis, you have a value, and then you're met by a value against it, the antithesis, and then you come to a synthesis. And then the synthesis becomes a new value, and then it goes through its development, then there's an antithesis and so forth. This is the way that life moves forward. This is like the growth is a process. You have ideas, and then people come up with issues against those ideas, and then you reconcile it, and then it moves on to a new process where this new idea then meets its challenges and so forth. So it's like the way that growth happens. Fact is, he thinks that's significant in all life, and history is all about this movement from thesis to antithesis to synthesis. The fact is Yosher takes this idea of the dialectic, and he shows how really it's very central to Torah. And the fact is, if you really look through Torah, you really see very much of this concept. But Yosher really develops the idea a lot. He had something different though. He says that basically within Torah, you don't necessarily have a synthesis. Torah, you find thesis and antithesis, not necessarily always synthesis, and what you usually have a lot of times is the coexistence of conflicting values. An example actually is Purim. He says Purim, if you consider Purim as 2 days, in terms of Tanis, Esther, and Purim, you have a day that's 1 day of Simcha and 1 day of Tanis. But he talks about the fact that if you look at Purim and Tanis Esther as a unit, he basically points out that there are conflicting values in the day. Okay, and the truth is, if you look at Purim, it's a very complex day. You know, I mean, people like pointing out to the fact that Purim is like Yom Kippurim. Right. Purim's idea, but the truth is that it really shows this concept here in terms of a certain seriousness to the day, seriousness, day of tshuva, whatever, and a certain aspect of it being a day of Mishnah and so forth. So the truth of Mishnah, of celebration. Okay, so the fact is, he also points this out by Tisha B'Av, for example. Tisha B'Av is also referred to as a moed, which implies it's like a holiday. So the fact of the matter is, he says, even on Tisha B'Av, which is a total day of mourning, there's an aspect that it has a sort of holiday aspect to it also. The point is Yosher tries to point out, in so much of our life, we have conflicting values. And the Jew is called upon to live within those conflicting values. So he says, he says that this is even more so in terms of the Jewish dialectic, in the sense that there isn't always a synthesis. Now, what we're going to develop here is a certain idea of a new idea that's going to, Shimon Shkop, from the way he's going to work with it. So you say Shimon Shkop is coming up with a synthesis. The point is, you really find both within learning. You find that you present a value, and you find that you have a coexisting value or a conflicting value, and then you come up with new ways of trying to integrate these values. But the fact is that living with these values and these conflicting values is a inherent aspect of Yiddishkeit, and it's also a most challenging aspect of Yiddishkeit, because in many ways that's why Limud Torah becomes so significant. Because Limud Torah becomes a lot of ways of trying to work out issues, because you have a question. And a question usually arises from the fact that you find that there is some type of conflict. So you find this in so many different issues within the presentation of ideas. And a lot of times people can't deal with the conflicting nature of these ideas, so they become dogmatic to one or the other. Okay, and usually that affects their learning, that affects their ability to really analyze things. It also affects their ability to live with the conflict. But the fact is, it basically takes away from the real dynamic nature of a lot of Torah. That's why you get a lot of simplicity. I'll give you a few examples of this. One is universalism and nationalism. At the same point in time, that when you look at yourself, are you a human being or are you a Jew? Okay, what's your first definition? Human being or Jew? Now the point is Jew can sit there and say Jew as distinct from non-Jew. Okay, which can create an idea of a certain amount of, I'll be concerned about Jews, I won't be concerned about non-Jews. That kind of aspect. Universalism says the aspect that you're a human being, says I'm concerned about all people, almost all people equally. Now the fact is that there's sometimes very strong tension between the two values. The book of Yonah has that aspect of that tension, right? According to what Chazal is saying, Yonah was concerned about going to Nineveh because it could possibly have negative effects upon Am Yisrael, upon the nation. So it was a very strong nationalistic idea. At the end of the story of Yonah, Kodesh Baruch Hu says, hey, they're human beings, they're universal. And the fact is that he's concerned about the universal nature of human beings. So the truth is, you see this constant back and forth, how do you balance the two, and so forth and so forth. And the fact is, you can see values both ways. Now, by the way, that's why it's very easy a lot of times for people to quote from Torah to back up almost any idea. You can find a source in Torah for almost anything, because Torah presents a whole slew of values, but the real workings of it is how you reconcile those values. Okay, with the recognition that there are conflicting natures of values. So a lot of times a person will quote a statement from the Talmud or something like that, like one way, and in fact not recognizing that the statement doesn't live in a vacuum. And in that statement it lives within a lot of other statements which could even be in conflict with it.
There's like a time period of the Gemara and how it dealt with things. So that was a certain effect during that time.
Well, in that period it dealt with those things in that way.
Yeah.
But the point is within the body of knowledge you find these conflicting values.
The topics, it's just the answer, or there's differences.
Well, because you go through different movements. But the fact is you still have that concept of
the reality now seems very different than then. How you
right, but because the continuation of the ideas, the dynamic nature of the ideas, is very significant. See, the point is that there's another idea here that a lot of times people don't want to recognize. There's a chair behind you. There's a because there's almost beautiful. Let me give you an example. Right. Let me see. Hegel talked about this over history in terms of movement of history.
What was his thing? Hegel, like he was like a psychiatrist?
No, he was a philosopher. He was a German philosopher. Really, the point is that people don't recognize about the dynamic nature of Torah, and therefore that Torah, by definition, goes through movement. Okay, I'm going to use the word movement. Our Torah today, in a certain way, is it's gone through movement from the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay, there's an interesting book put out by a professor at Bar Ilan, where he points out that he asks the question of what is the ideal Torah. Okay, when was the Torah at its highest ideal? So he presents two possibilities. Was the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu, the Torah of Har Sinai, the ideal, or is the Torah in the future, the Torah of Mashiach, the ideal? And he points out, he calls the difference between them the classical model or the romantic model. And what he's really saying is like this. There's a perception that says that the ideal Torah, or the pristine Torah, was given to Moshe Rabbeinu and Har Sinai. His name is actually Professor Silman. He says pristine Torah was given to Har Sinai, and we're just trying to protect it, not mess it up, not lose it, and so forth and so forth. So we're just trying to maintain what was there, but the pristine Torah, the ideal Torah, was there, and we're just trying to make sure that we keep it as best as we can. There's a whole different view of Torah as well. Okay, it's the fact that the ideal Torah is in Bana Mashiach. It's into the future. And the fact is for example, Ramosha a lot of times will say Lahagil Torah Ladira, to increase Torah and to beautify it. Adir is more than beautified. It's like, jewels, whatever. But the point is that Torah should keep growing and so forth and so forth. So we have a concept in Torah, Kedushay Torah. Now, at the same time, for example, everyone talks about Niskadnu Doros, the Doros keep going down, we want to protect Torah. We also have a concept that we stand on the shoulders of giants, so therefore we're trying to move forward. So the point is that when we talk in terms of Chedushim says that we can do something further. There's a concept that you talk in terms of this idea, of the ideal of moving forward, so that eventually at the Zman of Mashiach we will actualize Torah to the greatest extent. So, for example, take the idea in terms of slavery, right? The Chumash permits slavery, right? It has an idea of permitting slavery. So okay, it's has very strong restrictions on slavery and so forth, but it didn't just ban it. Okay, nowadays we would have a very negative idea about slavery. So what has happened? So there are a lot of people say because the Torah has affected our consciousness, so that what developed was a negativity to the consciousness of slavery. So, or let's say in terms of Avodah Zarah, in terms of sacrifices, the way the Rambam puts it, he thinks that at the time of the giving of the Torah, they couldn't, Kodesh Baruch Hu could not just blanket get rid of sacrifices, because the world was totally involved in it. But eventually, over years, people will learn how to stop sacrificing in terms of it being the way to relate to God. So the Rambam looks at sacrifices pretty negatively, and says in the Morah, I should say, it's not so simple. This Rambam is not so simple. There are buntes and pieces for this, but the point is that there's an idea though that we have grown, we have moved forward. Okay, through being affected by Torah.
What, aren't we supposed to renew the korbanot once the base of Mikdash?
Yes, that's the way Roman Pasuk that way in the Gemara.
So how can you say
that's
that
a big problem? No, the fact of the matter is, right now we can't bring korbanos. Right now it's very simple because we can't bring korbanos because we don't have the base Mikdash. We go there and do that, but there are shitas. There are shitas that hold
relating to doing korbanot like that allowed us to connect, or was it like we did this because we had a greater power in it that did more things?
The fact is that I never experienced sacrifices, so I don't really know. The fact is, but for example, there are shitas, das yichidim. Okay, there are shitas, very very minor shitas, very shitas. Supposedly, people say the Rav Kook held this shita that the only korbanos you'll have in the third base of Mikdash is minchas. It's only grain.
The Korban Pesach?
Only grain korbanos.
You can have.
Now the fact is that that's really das yichidim. Okay, even the Rambam says when Mashiach comes, but that's not the. But that's I'm trying to get across an idea. Like for example, there's an idea where you have movement forward. In other words, like you take for example the more liberal views within Orthodoxy. That have expanded the rights of women. Their argument is that we didn't do it 20 years ago. Yeah, we've grown. That part of Limud Torah, part of being from, is still to grow within halacha.
Right.
Now the point is that people say, well, it's not really within halacha, but the fact is that you have this issue also with rabbanans. Like for example, there's a whole shita by asmachtas. That asmachtas might be. What a smachta is, it's not a deraisa, it's not that this is the law that God stated at Sinai, but a smachta is, it's hinted to in the pasuk.
Right.
And the idea being that Chazal made these laws, and when we say there's a smachta, they used some pasuk to back up their law. So some people understand it to be a mnemonic, that Chazal made a drabanan. But and they use this pasuk sort of as a way of remembering, for people to remember the Rabbanan. Other people think it's the Ritva, but other people say no. That unless Asmakta is a hint in the Torah that when the people are able to have this law, you should make this law. And they had this whole issue by Rabbanans. Are Rabbanans movements forwards, or Rabbanans? Rabbanas take away from the pristine deraisa, so they movements forwards or not. So the fact is some people say some aspects of Rabbanans is that they're not the ideal, right? You should be really doing the deraisa, but we have to. But for some reason we had to put in certain gedarim because trying to do the pure deraisa would be too hard. Other people say no, Rabbanas are actually movements forwards. So, let me give you an example. Another example. Monogamy. Right? Only marrying one wife. Okay? Was that a movement forward? Or was that, or was it for some other reason? So, there are people who argue, no. Yeah, it's true that Torah permitted people to marry more than one wife, but that wasn't the ideal. But but for some reason the Torah said we can prove it now. But obviously through following Torah and being involved in Torah, you were supposed to develop an attitude that I really want a person should only have one. A man should only have one wife.
What's the whole Pelagish thing?
What?
What exactly is the deal with the Pelagish?
Pelagish is something else.
So then, how could
what?
marry many more wives and expect more out of them than anyone else?
So the fact is that as people point out that in Chazal you don't find I think I read somewhere that there was only one member of Chazal that had more than one wife at a time, at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the fact is that there was that everyone in Chazal practiced monogamy. I mean, people point out this by Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. The fact of the matter is, Avram only wanted one wife. Then Sari and Menu said, listen.
In every situation where there was multiple wives, it created problems for them.
Right, but that's all part of the idea of the movement forward. Just because the Torah matters it, does not mean that that's the ideal.
I heard an idea from someone that when he said it was kind of like really pretty wild idea. Can the Chazal of this, or I guess they're not Chazal, can the Rabbanim of this generation look back at a verse and change the Masorah of how to interpret it?
No. Not halachically.
So why could they?
They're not halachically. Because halakha has its own mechanics of it. I mean, the fact of the matter is...
Is there something similar to that or something related to that, looking back at something and...
If you have a verse and you want to do some analysis of a pasuk...
No, but I think related
that you can do analysis of pasuk. But in terms of halachic development of those analysis, there are certain rules of halacha.
Like, can you look at, like, you want to do a crazy shallow, but like let's say, I don't know, like something that leads to depression or something, so that's considered asur, so you look at the pasuk and you change it to...
No.
No?
Not from halacha.
I know.
Not in halacha.
For example, the month of Av, we should just abolish that.
That's something different.
At least
that's Rabbanus. That's an issue of Rabbanus. But what I'm trying to say though is, let me get back to this. What I'm trying to say though is that there is movement in the dynamic of Torah. Okay? Even halachic analysis. By the way, and halachic analysis is done within the confines of halacha, the parameters of halacha. That doesn't mean you can go do a drasha on a pasuk. Okay? The point is that there is a dynamic nature to Judaism that calls for movement. And movement means that the Judaism of one generation will be different than Judaism of previous generations, inherently within the halakhic system. Now, there is also another thing that wants to maintain tradition and maintain an aspect of holding on to tradition and the way it was. So you do have much more traditional forces as well. It's another dialectic. Okay, you have very strong traditional forces that my grandfather did this way, therefore I'm going to do the same way. On the other hand, you also have very dynamic forces that says there's a chiddush and you can move forward. The truth of the matter is, it's in a certain way, the movement forward aspects of Judaism are somewhat stifled because of the Reform and Conservative movements. Because once you have movement forward happening outside of halakhic parameters, what has happened was there was an entrenchment of the followers of halacha. So there was always this kind of movement forward, and it was always within the dialectic of you have to maintain tradition while you move forward and so forth. But when the forces on one side of tradition fell off, so because of the reform movement, and they started with the movement forward going outside of the parameters of halacha, you had a stronger reaction to it within the realm of halacha that said we have to entrench even more.
We are kind of stuck back in, late 18, early 1900s with the mode of dress and everything. Which is when the Enlightenment movement started.
Well, that's very much. I mean, there's a lot to back that up with. The fact is that. But what I'm trying to point out is that a lot of Judaism, a lot of Torah is this dialectic, and the dialectic happens in many ways because you're constantly moving. Now, when you talk about time, talk about history, you're talking about how the world is constantly moving, sort of creates a new issue within new issues constantly. It's my belief that Kodesh Baruch Hu is almost putting into the world this constant movement that calls upon us to constantly rethink Torah. So, for example, take women in Judaism, right? A lot of issues in terms of women in Judaism would have been asked 200 years ago, because no one thought of these things 200 years ago. It wasn't in the world.
Well, it was like restricted, so like the women kept it
people
in
didn't
the feelings
no,
they
people,
had.
People.
They
people
had their
didn't
feelings. They had their
the truth is that a lot of times it didn't even dawn upon people. It wasn't part of the consciousness
because
of
of
people.
the way they're grown up.
Because the people raised all of a sudden
so
come
they
up with a
wouldn't
new
think
idea.
certain things, but there were obviously in the world people that would.
The fact is, though, is that
Just
when
they
it
were a lot
really
rarer.
came out, when it really started to come out,
Possibly
all of a
literally
sudden you saw a lot of people deal with it with an halachic perspective because it was something that really was now had to be dealt with. Before, let me give you an example in terms of women in Judaism.
Female rabbis?
No, I'm gonna.
Women having
Laguna?
rules like.
No. I'm just thinking. I'm thinking.
There's an article I just read about how blue doesn't, like the color blue doesn't appear till more recently historically. And like basically there's some tribe in Africa that doesn't have a word for blue, and when asked to differentiate between squares of green and blue they couldn't, but they have like a lot of words for different shades of green, and they were able to differentiate between two shades of green, which I found very similar, almost to the point of not being able to differentiate. So the whole thing is they may not have even, it wouldn't have even dawned on them because there was no concept of
their concepts. That area and where they
Right. I mean, I'm trying to think of an example like this where it's like we don't recognize things we take for granted. Like, I think about this, like slavery. Good people, normal people in the South had black slaves. It didn't even dawn on them that maybe you shouldn't beat them. I mean, the fact is, we look at that behavior and we can't even understand it. I mean, I was reading somewhere where it's like
either could be you.
Yeah, I mean,
today
you
it's
don't.
not eating a burger.
It's like you can't.
Why not?
You can't. The world is going to change, and therefore it actually affects our consciousness, and therefore. But at the root of it is the fact that the Torah, by always presenting a wide spectrum of values, and the dialectic that I was trying to describe, always left the opportunity for this type of analysis. The most anti-dogmatic aspect of Torah was the fact that it constantly presented differing viewpoints. It constantly presented differing concepts, differing perceptions.
In what?
In almost any, and we're looking over here. It talks about God being selfless, the value of being selfless, and it says Chayecha Kodem. Your life comes first, which means you have to be concerned about yourself. When I'm concerned about myself, I'm concerned about another.
So there's always
there's always that tension.
Both sides, two sides to the coin.
And you see that, and what happens is once there's two sides to the idea, then eventually, as the world goes through movements, we see the ways to perspective. See, what a lot of times we don't recognize is how many values we think are so given. Like you guys are talking about Skokie and the aspect of freedom of speech and freedom of religion. Okay? The idea of freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and so forth, where did that come from? You think 500 years ago, do you think there was a concept of freedom of speech? A concept of freedom of religion?
So a lot of activists in the 60s started it all.
No, freedom of speech was before that. We're the activists. Fact is that the values that we take for granted in America today, in Canada, America, whatever, a lot of times we can ask where those values come from. Where do you get the idea of democracy? Where's the idea? Okay, the idea of one man having one vote. The idea of even the opening line of the the Declaration of all men are created equal.
It used to be self-evident that all men are created equal.
Right. From where?
It's a ticket America.
Where did it come from? right?
From Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah.
Who owned slaves.
They believe that. Yes, exactly. They believe that's another thing. How they were able to live with the fact that he said all men were created equal, and yet he still owned slaves. So he himself said basically, that's the way it is. Other people said you're right.
Under the category of men. At the
right,
time.
Exactly.
So
how do they understand these things? But the fact that as all men are created equal, all men, the fact that freedom of religion, where these concepts come from. So the point is we take it. Now the truth is though, is that I can give you an argument within Torah. For example, we're bringing up these issues of where these values came from, but the fact is there was movement in the world and create these and brought with values. But the fact is what's remarkable is how these values found place within Torah. Like for example, you take in terms of freedom of speech, take in terms of freedom of religion. Okay, do they have a place within Torah? So the fact is they do, but in somewhat of a different way. For example, in freedom of religion, it's not that Torah believes in total freedom of religion, but what it does believe in is the lack of culpability for individuals if they don't get it right. Okay, at least if they can't, if they strive with it. Like for example, you have a concept of Tinuk Shenishba. So the point is, the concept of Tinuk Shenishba says that someone's not culpable if they weren't brought up with a certain education. So therefore, it accepts the fact that people people cannot be held fully responsible if they don't have if they are lacking certain education or whatever. You see it with other things, like people talk about this as no Nisan Mugloyim. So how do we know this? How can you how can you hold someone culpable if they don't accept it without clarifying proof? The fact is that the point is that when the world of freedom of religion started happening and this started developing, you had an opening within Torah to be able to consider this value, which was a value that was very significant to Jews. So the point is that if you're open to the idea that Torah has a wide spectrum of consideration of values, and therefore a dynamic nature,
it's hard always to see that though. When you explain it like this, it opens up that idea, and you can see it more in Torah values. But a lot of groups will restrict a lot.
Right, and that comes about, and that's why the great loss of it is in their ability to present Torah ideas. And the fact is that's why the idea of Beis Hill, quoting Beis Shammai first, the fact is the ability to know shitas that aren't part of your system is what opens up a lot of these perspectives. Fact is that the breadth of what's possible in thinking within Torah is very broad. But it comes from the fact is that there's always a dialectic. But a lot of times people want to stay away from the dialectic because it could lead to people choosing one way or the other way and not being the way you want the person to be. And that's one of that's what people are always concerned about.
They're concerned you're going to fall into another way.
Right. It's not even the fact of what we would call off the derech. It doesn't even mean they're necessarily concerned that people are going to become non-religious. It starts with their concern the person will follow a different shita, right? That really should be seen as acceptable within Torah, but these people define what is acceptable within Torah so narrowly, so that if you're following a different shita, it's deemed to be that you're could be off the derech. right? So the point is that that's a big problem. Okay? But the fact is that's why I want to get into this, is that he is going to deal with dialectic. He is now going to introduce this idea of being selfless, and he introduces the idea of being selfless, and then he throws out this idea of chayecha kodem and the value of selfishness, of being concerned about yourself. And therefore you have to start now thinking that way, and then what eventually he's going to do is come up with a different perception. But that takes it to a new level. But this happens all the time in learning. Okay, it happens all the time in learning, but it also can happen all the time in just thoughts. I'm trying to think of an example in terms of women in Judaism. If you
What those? Rabbi's daughters.
Yeah. See, what's interesting, for example, in terms of Rashi's daughters, it's a good example. The fact is people take this standard of women. They can't learn Torah, they can't learn this, they can't learn that. Okay. And then they say, well, there are exceptions. Rashi's daughters.
Actually, I read on Wikipedia that they even actually, there's no proof that their parents fell in.
Okay. I don't know. The argument is more that they were Talmidei Chacham, that they had some knowledge. Which, hanging around Rashi, I'm sure they had some knowledge. I mean, okay, but let's take something. There's a book out called All Your Children Shall Be Learned. It's written by a woman here from Toronto, Dr. Shoshana Zolty. In it, she mentions that the Maral's wife, the Maral Prabhupada's wife, edited all his form. Okay? And she said that her husband made, I think, 10 mistakes in terms of sources, but you have to forgive him. He made a few mistakes in terms of sources because he was so involved in his writing, so he got the source wrong, the wrong page or whatever. So she corrected it. Okay, so that's his wife. Okay, so a little more Torah than me, most likely, Okay. Now the point is that there's exceptions. So people think, those are Yechidei Skula, but it's not for all the women. The truth is that halachically, if it's acceptable, if one woman can learn Torah, so then how do you define the line? Where do you see in halacha you have that kind of disagreement? The point is
saying only tzaddikim can learn this.
So the point is, then you have to find what's the criteria, okay?
Right.
And the criteria can no longer be, right, their gender. Okay, if their criteria has to be something different. So then eventually people can sit there and say, listen, if all women are on that level, then all women become the new exception, right? So the truth is that a lot of people are arguing about women learning today. They say, because Rashi's daughters, well, that was only unique. Yeah, back then, they were the only ones in that category. Nowadays, because women have more education or whatever, they're now all women are part of this quote-unquote exception. The point is that that's movement, but the fact is it's already built into the halacha. Because halacha can't read, once Rashi's daughters were learning Torah, then you can't say all women can't learn Torah. You have to find a different category for what's being said there. So that's example of movements within Torah and ideas within Torah. But a lot of times you really had those openings because you had this kind of acceptance already built into the system. People gave answers, and then you come up with new answers. We have new perceptions from our world today, and they're not contradictory.
So do you analyze the source differently than other people have analyzed in the past?
Yeah, but you can analyze differently, but within certain rules. You have to know when you're dealing with a Rishon and Nachman, what the rules are. You have to understand your limitations, and you also have to understand your halachic ability.
Right.
Okay. The fact is that there's one thing in terms of drushes, and another thing in terms of halachic application of it.
Right.
But the fact is that something new that hasn't been said beforehand, and it's like, and who knows what will happen? I mean, Rav Kook is pretty well accepted nowadays. He was saying very innovative stuff back then. But the truth is, Shofar Hirsch was also, and when he came up with ideas, it was all substantiated through his learning, right? All substantiated through his learning. The point is that what happens is if you see a dialectic, you see two values, and you see that at the core of two values, and you try and see how you mesh those values. The point is the answer of how those values mesh, or how those values you learn to coexist with those values, right? So that's one answer. But once you've already given value to those two values, then there's greater flexibility for a new answer of how those two values can coexist. Right?
Yeah.
And that's a lot to do with it. There's a lot of movement.
So you build on it.
So you build on it.
Okay.
Come with new perspectives. It's from the world. And you're analyzing things differently. I mean, the fact is that we go through the world goes through major changes, and they can have. That doesn't mean the Torah changes, but they can call upon us to look at Torah in a different light. And I'll go back to that freedom of religion thing. We have benefited. Jewish people have benefited from freedom of religion. It's a very strong value in the Western world. We've benefited from it. We stand by it, so forth. So the truth is that it would not be surprising for us to try and work out a way to be able to find a Torah basis for it. Because if we've benefited from it, and we're going to argue for the value of it.
Freedom of religion?
Yeah.
Like all religion, or just...
Well, what does freedom of religion basically means? That you allow a person to practice his religion within certain parameters. See, let me give you an example, because you guys are talking about this.
About freedom of the choice.
The choice. The point is, but on the other hand,
choice is not necessarily religion, so there's a difference.
No. Freedom of choice is the idea that there's free choice.
That also accepted amongst us?
The fact is that within Torah, there's choice, there's free choice, but there's also culpability for your free choice, right? If you have free choice. If you choose to do an avera, then you have to accept the consequences of that choice. The point is freedom of religion basically says to me, I have to that we respect someone else's religion and allow that person to follow their religion, unless it's going to be detrimental to society. In other words, if the religion says it's okay to go beat people, we're going to say no, we're not going to allow freedom of religion. But we've benefited from freedom of religion. That's why we've been, allowed to keep Shabbos and stuff like that, because there's an attitude of we'll allow you to practice your religion. On the surface, it would seem that Torah would not be so accepting of freedom of religion, because you see very strong statements against avodah zarah, against idolatry. So there seems to be that, hey, we weren't too tolerant to idolaters.
What's the thing about Ger Toshev?
Ger Toshev has to accept the Shem Mitzvah B'nai Noach. That's a different thing. That's within our religion. Shem Mitzvah B'nai Noach is the way a non-Jew practices our religion.
What are the three options?
When Yosher went into the land?
Said, we have Eretz Yisrael back in the day, and someone wanted to join us. What were the three options? He had to
become a Jew. He had to be a Ger Toshev, or he had to leave the country. You can't. We weren't too tolerant of avodah zarah. Okay. So the point exists, though. So on the surface, it seems that we're not too tolerant of idolatry. The point is
nowadays we don't.
But nowadays,
idolaters, like what they do, we don't look at.
But I'm saying that in America, if you're an idolater in America, in Canada, right? That's your religion. We have freedom of religion. There was a case in Florida of people who were pagans who wanted to bring animal sacrifices, and the law said that was cruelty to animals and prohibited it. They argued that they were allowed to do it for free because of freedom of religion. So in a court case, they took a court that they should be allowed to do this. Every Orthodox public policy organization, including every Jewish Orthodox, in other words, the OU, the Aguda, who's all got involved on their side because of freedom of religion. Because of freedom of religion. The point is,
pretty much adjusting.
Because
it was done in like a certain place in Sweden or something.
Well, okay, so the point is they argued freedom of religion. So the fact is that they came out intervening on the side of freedom of religion. The point is yes, it's practical for us to support freedom of religion. If the dominant religion is not our religion, then we support freedom of religion. But what about if we came in charge? Will we say, listen, if you guys want to practice freedom of religion to us, that's great. But if we're in charge, we won't practice it. It doesn't sound too understand. It sounds sort of like using. In fact, what bothers me is that it's Skokie. We were talking about Skokie before. I remember that the Nazi was challenged by a reporter about freedom of speech, because he was arguing freedom of speech to be able to march. So this reporter said to him, "You guys don't believe in freedom of speech, so how can you argue it?" So he sort of was mocking and says, "If you guys are stupid, no, that's right. In our country, we would never. If we were in charge, we would never allow freedom of speech. But if you're stupid enough to have this value, we're going to take advantage of it." Yeah. Okay, so are we saying the same thing about freedom of religion? That in our country we wouldn't do it, but if we were in charge, we would never do it. That sounds sort of like. I mean, I remember the Nazis saying that, and it sounded sort of like. What's the right word? It sounded
hypocritical.
Hypocritical, but it was more than hypocritical. It was like. It sounded very wrong. So the point is that if we sit there and say, hey, we're going to quote a value for religion, and we've benefited from it, and so forth, and we look upon this country as positive for having this value, right? Like Moshe referred to America as a Medina Shel Chesed. So then, how do we understand this value? And how do we work with it? So that's an example of the movement of Torah, that we do work with it. What happened different in times when we were really strong against idolatry? No, we don't have any patience for idolatry. Yeah. But the truth of the matter is, you have to remember, in the time, we've talked about this before, in the time we were talking about idolatry, they had much more obvious clarity about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So idolatry was really very much of a state, very much in your face to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because they already knew what the nisim and flows of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it's a little bit different. But the point is that what I'm really trying to get at is there's a movement of there's dynamic movement within Torah, and that dynamic in many ways comes from the dialectic nature of Torah, that you have different values presented. Not just one value, not just here's the final conclusion, but you're presented with the conflicting values. In other words, Shimshkov here says, there's a value of selflessness, there's a value of chayach. Oh, wow, they're contradictory. I got to work out some way of reconcile. So he's going to work out a way. But the very fact that you introduce this idea of working through these things is an example that you're bringing a dynamic nature, and that completely develops a different perception of how you think and how you work through values. Right. And a lot of people don't do it anymore, sadly. Okay.